Hi, I'm Dan, otherwise known as the Gardening Brewer, over on Instagram, and now, I guess, the Gardening Brewer here on YouTube as well. I've had quite a few requests for me to do some YouTube videos or questions if I have a YouTube channel, so I decided I would try to do some longer form content on here. It's a cool windy spring day here in Slave Lake, Alberta, which is a Zone 3 climate. We get down in the neighborhood of minus 40 Celsius in the winters here, and my growing season is basically from the start of June till the end of August. I try to extend my season as much as I can with season extending techniques like these cold frames over the front yard bed so I can germinate seeds earlier. Since this is the first video, I thought I'd do it as sort of just an intro and a little bit of a garden tour, and I'll talk a little bit about the way I garden. I like to do what you call ecological gardening, so while I am certainly growing food for myself out here, I'm also trying to make sure my garden benefits, wildlife, the pollinators around here, birds, and of course the amazing amount of life present in our soils, everything from bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and all kinds of other invertebrates and microbes in here. So some things in my garden might look a little bit strange to you, like this natural wood retaining wall behind me, but large pieces of wood with the bark on like this can be a great habitat for wildlife. Things like beetles and carpenter bees can basically make burrows in here, and those burrows can often be reused later by other species that don't dig their own burrows. And of course, you can provide habitat for a variety of beneficial fungi that could enhance your soil around here. And if you want, you could even inoculate these with culinary mushrooms and use these to grow culinary mushrooms as well, which these logs aren't inoculated with anything, but some of my other logs in other areas are. So in addition to being a landscaping feature and a pollinator habitat, they can also potentially be a source of food production. Right here, even though it's so small you can barely see it on camera, is the start of my native shrub hedge. Basically, I've got Saskatoon, high bush cranberry, beaked hazelnut farther down, and then red osier dogwood and wild rose around the corner, and I'm growing it all up into a hedge, which I will basically prune to keep low, so it will provide a little bit of shade to the front yard garden, a little bit of privacy, but also will produce a variety of food for me. Every one of these plants is a native plant to my area, so they'll also provide a lot of benefit for the wildlife here. Here I'm in my front yard garden. Basically this strip I put in last year, and there's once again some small trees planted in here that are very young, but everything else around me here is brand new, just put in the last couple weeks, all no dig. So basically I've just layered up layers of mulch on the soil, what you'd call basically like a lasagna mulch. So what I do is I take a layer of carbon-rich material like these decomposed wood chips, which are already nicely composted, so they're not going to be tying up too much nitrogen anymore. And then I add a layer of nitrogen-rich material like coffee grounds or spent brewer's grain or kitchen scraps, and basically just make layers of compost in place that I let sit here and compost in the garden and then can plant in a few months. When making beds like this, I prefer to do it the fall before so they have more time to break down, but I'm still excited to see how this garden performs this year in its first season, having so little time to decompose. So here is a hotbed. Basically, I've built like a small greenhouse on top of a bed filled with decomposing organic matter. Once again, basically like a lasagna mulch system where I've just piled up layers of alternating nitrogen-rich and carbon-rich material to fill this. So because of the protection from the glass windows that I'm using, these are just old windows from my house that I replaced, and also the heat generated in the bed itself from the decomposing organic matter. It's quite a bit warmer in here than it is outside, so I've been able to have stuff growing in here for actually a few weeks now, despite the fact that we've been through several cold snaps where we got down to below minus 10 Celsius. There are tons of radishes sprouted that I direct sowed in here, and then some larger ones that I transplanted a few weeks ago. There's celery, leek, green onion, and this little grass-looking stuff is actually just barley that has, hard to get sometimes, roots go deep, but it's just barley that was in the straw mulch here. So you can see a little bit poking up there is straw that is underneath here that's decomposing. And there's always a little bit of viable seed. There we go, right? That actually might be wheat. I like to do things as sustainably as I can around here, so I actually devote quite a large space here in the backyard to my compost bays. I have a 5-bay system just built out of pallets, built for free, like basically everything in my garden is. I get tons of free wood in the form of pallets like these, and also tree trimmings from like arborists basically, where there's just large pieces of unprocessed wood that I can use for building in the garden. Each of these bays can produce about a cubic meter, which is also around a cubic yard of compost, and currently they are all full. So these 2 bays here are finished compost that will be going onto the garden fairly soon. This bay is still quite hot. You can see that's up almost 50 degrees Celsius, so that's still in thermophilic phase. Not as hot as it has been though, it's coming down. And then these ones are relatively fresh. This is just yard waste and brewer's grain and straw and leaves and stuff. And this one is actually manure and leaves, bison manure from the bison ranch I work on. Now, those of you who know me from Instagram are probably wondering why you haven't seen her already, but this is my dog Sophie, who you'll probably see in my videos quite a bit. She likes to hang out in the garden with me as well when I'm doing stuff. Sitting here under my natural wood trellis, surrounded by my raised hugelkultur beds. Once again, these are all built for free from free materials I sourced around me. I live right in town. I'm not out on an acreage or something, and my lot is 0.17 acres in total size. That includes my house as well, and decks and space that's not available for growing. But it's not massive. It's probably fairly large if you're from a very highly populated city, but for a rural small town like this, it's pretty average. I've basically converted as much of my lawn as I can into growing space while still leaving some space for her to run around. And you can see currently being spring, I've got all kinds of weird stuff going on, like totes and windows with frames on my beds to get things warmed up so I can plant earlier in the season. I've got all kinds of weird stuff going on in my yard. This is my greenhouse I built out of old free scrap windows last fall, and then my second greenhouse, which is more of a polytunnel style one. In the greenhouse, things are starting to look pretty good. I've had things growing in here now for a few weeks, and they have once again, like the hotbeds, been through a cold snap. My Instagram fans, Tom is still doing well since transplant. He has not died from the cold since moving him out here. That's a tomato plant, which, normally wouldn't be outside in my climate until basically the start of June or the very end of May. Both of these beds here are filled with decomposing organic matter to help provide some additional heat to this space, and I do have a small tent stove in here that I can fire up if it gets really cold in spring and I want to protect plants like my tomatoes. I also built this pallet shelf here that's got a little bit of a seed starting area. So this place is still definitely a work in progress. I just passed my second anniversary in this place since buying it, so I've had basically one full growing season and a partial season before, and this is going to be my third growing season here. A lot of these beds here are new, added within the last year or so, because I'm constantly adding and improving the garden as I have, time and resources and money and everything. There's lots of new stuff this year, so we'll see how it all performs. A big focus of this year has been to try to add more native plants to my garden. So last season, I collected a lot of seed from the areas around me. I also did buy some native plants as well. You might be wondering what I'm even talking about with native plants, and if you're not really into gardening very much, you might not realize that, especially if you live in North America like me, right? I'm in Canada. A lot of the plants that are sold in nurseries, especially like the big box stores, are going to be plants that are from Europe and Asia and South America and all over the world, right? It's a result of this global economy we live in, but a lot of them are not native to our area and therefore don't provide nearly the same ecological benefit, right? The same benefit to wildlife, to pollinators, as plants that are native to here. The wildlife, the plants, and everything else in these landscapes have been co-evolving for millions and millions of years, right? So a lot of them are very, very heavily interdependent. So a lot of native species actually rely on only a handful or less of native plants to provide most of their food and or habitat. So trying to provide as many of those in my garden as possible will ensure that I can provide habitat for the most wildlife. You can see just little seedlings, a lot of radishes in this area starting to come up right now. And there's also a couple of logs in here. There's one and there's one, where if you look closely, you can see there's those holes covered in wax. So these are logs that I inoculated with oyster mushroom plug spawns. So hopefully these didn't get too cold out here at the end of winter and they will successfully colonize and produce some mushrooms maybe by this fall. So I think I'm going to wrap the video up here. This hasn't been quite a full garden tour. I have not showed you all the beds and all the space, but there's lots of chances to do that in future videos. Right now, there's still not much going on, particularly in the outdoor growing spaces. Just because of my climate. Being in a northern Canadian climate, the season is just starting for me. Most people would not even consider it to be gardening season yet. The snow is just melted. The ground is still thawing. In a lot of areas, it is still frozen. But with my season extension techniques, I do already have some stuff going. So I guess follow along if you want to see what an entire cold climate gardening season is like up in Canada. You are probably from Instagram and are familiar with kind of what I do, but I do a fair amount of no-till gardening type content, big focus on trying to build healthy soil, doing all this stuff as cheap and sustainably as I can. I do mess around with some mushroom growing stuff sometimes, a lot of composting type content. So if all that seems up your alley and I seem like your type of dude, follow along and I'll see you guys next video.